When Jim woke up after groaning and rolling around in a stupor, he wondered who turned his light on. He supposed he might not have turned it off before going to sleep last night, but he was pretty sure he had. At the very least, he wanted it off. He was trying to sleep. He tried to reach the light bulb, but didn't have the strength to stand, and his bed engulfed his feet with their weight. Once he got off the floor, he remembered how tired he was. He turned to his side with his ear pressed down, and he could hear a buzzing coming from the pillow. He could hear it with his other ear as well. Crunch, crunch, crick, crunch, leaves crushed down into the earth, unto the earth. Prona cadat cespitim prementum. Jim imagined himself getting up and walking out the door, but when he imagined turning the handle, he accidentally imagined it going all the way around. No matter how much he concentrated, it just kept going on around and around like that in a loop, forever, and he never got out of the door. It had been snowing for 10 years now, but the snow was always so light that as soon as it touched the ground, it melted. Sometimes Jim would try to look up at the sky and wonder about what was behind the clouds, but the snow would fall on his eyelashes and make him blink, so he always stopped. Jim's neighbor smiled at him with tight lips and made a remark about Jim's clothes. When the neighbor spoke, Jim looked at their dog and it started to shout at him in a human voice that was louder than Jim had ever heard before, and Jim couldn't hear anything else. At work, Jim remembered again how tired he was, and how important everyone always said sleep was, so he closed his eyes. All he could think about was how he couldn't know which way his eyes were pointing if he couldn't see, so he opened them again just to check. Jim wondered, what if he had opened his eyes and it was still all black, and nothing had changed? A computer update threatened Jim with new features and fixed bugs, but Jim was too afraid that if he changed his computer, he would lose something important he would never remember about later. Mother, Daphne, my spear of dust lies at my belt. What tree knows a new one is now, nova mentita, enes metitoala. When Jim was leaving, one of his co-workers said, "Hey Jim, where are you off to?" And he replied, "I'm going home." He was worried about the way that he said it, and that it sounded rude, and he repeated it to himself as he went home so he wouldn't be embarrassed next time. The woman standing next to him at the bus stop kept checking her watch, and eventually a man with large wings picked her up and flew off as she struggled and yelled about being late to a meeting. Again. Jim wished a man would pick him up and fly off, away from his meetings. Jim stared at the light on his ceiling and thought about how he should turn it off, and brush his teeth, and watch the news, and make his bed. He didn't really feel like it, though. Jim's boss brought him aside at work, and Jim was afraid he would be fired. But his boss said he wanted Jim to know how grateful he was at how brave Jim was being, and if there was anything he could do. Jim was confused, but he shrugged and said he could use a raise. "Of course," his boss said. Jim didn't respond, and the boss opened the door for him. "A diaphane, Rex. Best keep them closed. I don't need that sight." That night, Jim finally turned the light off, and it made him feel powerful. And he wondered why it made him feel powerful. Jim remembered the winged man from before, and thought maybe he didn't need a winged man. Maybe he could just fly away himself. Jim was standing out in a park he had never noticed before between his home and work. He let the snow fall in his eyelashes and only blinked when he wanted to. His neighbor's dog shouted at him, encouragingly this time, and he saw a fly buzz past his face up to the clouds, and he bent his knees to follow, shifting his feet and stretching out his arms, a cool breeze fluttering the excess shirt on his sides, and he could see a bright spot right above him that hurt to look at behind the clouds, but he looked at it anyways, and he took a breath deeper than he ever had before and said, "I'm going home," to no one in particular, and he jumped up with as much strength as he could manage to muster, life flowing into his hair and clothes and stomach, lightness lifting his loose arms and legs, the trees around him tripping and bending away, talking and telling each other about that spectacular man still standing before them. And Jim rolled his shoulder blades back, his eyes cold and wet and gleaming from snowflakes, and felt himself lift up off the ground. And for a moment, it seemed as if he actually might fly. For a moment.